The drunk college kids swung at the old waiter, but when Frank moved, 60 years of training kicked in, and everyone in that Chicago diner realized they had no idea who they were looking at. Welcome to One Human One Story. Before we tell this incredible story, have you ever encountered a waiter at a restaurant who you suspected might be a hidden hero? Write in the comments. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit subscribe. Frank Martinez had been serving coffee at Murphy's Diner on Chicago's South Side for 40 years. The red brick building sat wedged between a laundromat and a used car lot on West 35th Street. Its neon sign flickered intermittently, spelling out Mur Highs in pink letters that had seen better decades. Inside, the worn linoleum floors told stories of countless meals, shared conversations had, and lives intersected over cups of coffee that cost $1.50 and never got cold. Customers called him Pop and left decent tips. Not because the service was exceptional, but because Frank had that rare gift of making everyone feel like they mattered. Nobody looked twice at the 68-year-old man who moved slowly between tables, wiping down surfaces with practiced efficiency. His hands were weathered from decades of carrying hot plates. His smile was genuine, but never lingered too long. He wore the same white apron every shift, and his name tag read simply, Frank, no last name, no title. The diner itself was a time capsule from 1952, when Murphy's grandfather had first opened it with dreams of feeding the neighborhood. Red vinyl booths lined the windows. A long counter stretched along the kitchen, where you could watch the cook flip burgers on a grill that had seen presidents come and go. The walls were covered with faded photographs of local high school football teams, newspaper clippings about neighborhood heroes, and a single American flag that Frank straightened every morning when he arrived. Frank's routine never varied. He clocked in at exactly 6 a.m., made the first pot of coffee, and began setting up tables. He knew every regular by name and their usual order. Mrs. Henderson always sat in booth 3 and ordered 2 eggs over easy with wheat toast. Detective Rodriguez from the local precinct took his coffee black and read the Tribune while eating a Denver omelet. The construction crew from the job site down the street filled the counter every morning, ordering enough food to fuel 10 hours of hard labor. But Frank was more than just efficient. He remembered birthdays, brought extra napkins without being asked, and had a way of listening that made people want to share their troubles. When Mrs. Chen's husband passed away, Frank made sure her favorite soup was always available. When Tommy the dishwasher was struggling with his GED, Frank helped him with math problems during slow periods. He was the kind of man who made a place feel like home. The trouble started on a Tuesday night in November. Chicago's wind was cutting through the streets like a blade, and the diner was mostly empty except for a few regulars nursing coffee and pie. Around 11 p.m., 2 Northwestern University students stumbled through the front door. They were drunk loud and clearly looking for somewhere to continue their night. The shorter one had bleached hair styled in a way that cost more than Frank made in a week. He wore a designer jacket and kept checking his phone. His friend was taller, broader, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. They slid into a booth near the back, their voices echoing through the quiet diner. Sarah, the young waitress, was working the night shift. She was barely 19, studying at the community college and working 30 hours a week to pay for textbooks and rent. Frank had taken her under his wing when she started 6 months ago, teaching her how to balance plates, how to handle difficult customers, and most importantly, how to maintain dignity even when others tried to take it away. The 2 students immediately started complaining. The booth was sticky, the menu was outdated, the lighting was too bright. Sarah tried her best to accommodate them, bringing extra napkins, offering to move them to a different table, but nothing was good enough. They ordered burgers and fries, then spent 20 minutes criticizing everything from the temperature of the water to the speed of service. When Sarah brought their food, the taller one grabbed her wrist. His grip was firm, possessive. "Hey, sweetheart, why don't you sit with us for a while? We're way more interesting than these old losers." Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I need to get back to work," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The shorter one laughed, sliding his hand across the table toward her. "Come on, don't be like that. We tip real good, better than these broke locals." That's when Frank appeared. He didn't rush, didn't make a scene, just materialized beside their booth like he'd been there all along. "Excuse me, gentlemen, is there a problem here?" The taller student looked Frank up and down, taking in his gray hair, his slight limp, the way his shoulders curved forward from decades of carrying trays. "Yeah, old man, there is a problem. Your waitress here has an attitude problem." Frank kept his voice calm, measured. "Sarah, please go check on table 6. I'll handle this." The shorter one stood up, swaying slightly from the alcohol. "Handle what exactly, Pops? You gonna teach us some manners? You gonna show us how to treat a lady?" This brought another round of laughter from his friend. Frank simply nodded toward the door. "I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave. Your meal is on the house, but you need to go now." "What did you just say to me?" the taller one demanded, standing up and stepping closer to Frank. His chest puffed out, his voice rising. "You think you can kick us out? Do you know who my father is? Do you know what kind of lawyers we can afford?" Frank didn't step back, didn't raise his voice. "I said it's time to go. This is your final warning." The drunk student laughed, throwing his head back. "Final warning? From a broken-down old waiter? What are you gonna do, call your manager?" He took a wild swing at Frank's face. It wasn't a good punch. The student was drunk, unbalanced, and had probably never been in a real fight in his life, but it was meant to hurt an old man who couldn't defend himself. Except Frank wasn't just an old man. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics, Frank caught the student's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and had him face down on the table. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. The pressure applied to the wrist was precise enough to cause immediate compliance, without permanent damage. The second student froze mid-laugh as Frank's eyes met his. Those eyes weren't angry. They weren't cruel. They were calm, cold, and absolutely certain. The eyes of someone who had made life and death decisions in situations far more dangerous than a Chicago diner. "You have 2 choices," Frank said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Walk out that door right now, or I call the police and explain how you assaulted an employee, threatened another, and resisted when asked to leave peacefully." The student on the table whimpered as Frank maintained just enough pressure to keep him still. "Please let me go. We'll leave. We're sorry." Frank released him, stepped back, and watched as both students stumbled toward the exit. The taller one turned back at the door, his face red with embarrassment and alcohol. "This isn't over, old man. You have no idea who you're messing with." Frank didn't respond, just stood there until they were gone, then walked calmly to the door and locked it. The other customers in the diner sat in stunned silence. They had just watched a 68-year-old waiter neutralize a threat with the precision and control of someone who had done it many times before. Sarah stared at Frank, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Frank, where did you learn to do that? That was like something out of a movie." Frank adjusted his apron, picked up the water pitcher, and resumed his rounds. "Long time ago, kiddo. Different life." But one customer had noticed more than just the physical technique. George Kowalski was a man in his 50s who sat alone at the counter most Tuesday nights. He was a Vietnam veteran himself, though he rarely talked about it. He had recognized something in Frank's movement that went beyond self-defense classes or martial arts training. The way Frank had controlled the situation wasn't just about technique. It was about command presence, about knowing exactly how much force to apply and when to stop. When Frank walked past him to refill his coffee, George spoke quietly without looking up from his newspaper. "What unit?" Frank paused, studied the man's weathered hands, his straight posture despite years of construction work, the way he held his coffee cup with both hands like he was still warming them around a campfire in some distant jungle. "First Cavalry Division Vietnam, 68 to 71. You Marines. K. San, 68. George looked up, meeting Frank's eyes for the first time. "Heard stories about you cavalry boys. Heard you guys could move fast when things got hot." Frank nodded once, poured George's coffee without being asked, and started to walk away. George's voice stopped him. "You ever think about those days?" "Every day," Frank replied, "but thinking and talking are different things." "I get that." George went back to his newspaper. Some things are better left buried, but Frank didn't move away immediately. For a moment, he stood there looking at George, really looking at him. "You doing okay, brother? You look like a man carrying weight." George's hands tightened slightly around his cup. "Some nights are harder than others. You know how it is." Frank reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a small card. "There's a group meets Thursday nights at the VFW Hall on Ashland. Good men. No pressure to talk, just good men who understand." George took the card, studied it, then slipped it into his shirt pocket. "Thanks, Pop. Maybe I'll check it out." Frank patted his shoulder once and continued his rounds. Sarah watched this exchange from behind the counter, her curiosity growing. She had worked with Frank for months, but had never seen him interact with a customer like that. There had been something almost formal about it, like two soldiers recognizing each other across a crowded room. Later that night, after the last customer had left and the register was counted, Frank sat in the back booth with Sarah. She had questions, but she was afraid to ask them. Frank had always been private, never talking about his life before the diner. She knew he lived alone in a small apartment 6 blocks away. She knew he walked to work every day, regardless of weather. She knew he sent money every month to someone somewhere, but she had never asked who. Finally, she found the courage to speak. "Frank, who were you before this? Before Murphy's, I mean." Frank looked out the window at the empty street. The sodium lights cast everything in an orange glow, making the familiar neighborhood look foreign and distant. "Someone who learned that the hardest battles aren't always fought with weapons, Sarah. Sometimes they're fought with patience, with choosing to serve others when you could demand to be served, with deciding every morning to get up and do something useful, even when the world tells you your best days are behind you. But you were military, weren't you? The way you moved tonight, that wasn't something you learned at the YMCA." Frank smiled at that. 3 tours in Vietnam, came home in 71 and tried to figure out what a soldier does when there's no more war to fight. Took me about 20 years to find the answer, which was, you keep serving, just in different ways. Frank stood up and began wiping down the table. "You saved me tonight," Sarah said quietly. Frank paused in his cleaning. "No, kiddo. I just reminded 2 young men that respect isn't optional, that actions have consequences. The real saving happens every day when you choose to keep going, to keep serving, to keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. Even when today was pretty rough. Do you really believe that? That tomorrow will be better?" Frank considered this as he finished cleaning. "I believe that we make tomorrow better by how we act today, by treating people with dignity, by standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, by doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Especially when no one's watching." Sarah helped him finish closing duties, stacking chairs, wiping down the counter, counting tips. As they prepared to leave, she asked one more question. "Frank, do you ever regret it? Coming back, I mean, from the war?" Frank turned off the lights and held the door open for her. "I regret a lot of things, Sarah, but coming back isn't one of them. Someone had to come back to tell the story, to make sure people remember that freedom isn't free, that peace isn't permanent, that good people have to choose to be good every single day." They walked out into the Chicago night, the cold air cutting through their jackets. Frank waited until Sarah got into her car and drove away before beginning his own walk home. As he walked, he thought about the 2 students, about George, about all the people who passed through Murphy's diner thinking they were just getting a meal, when really they were getting a small piece of hope. Frank Martinez never talked about his 3 tours in Vietnam. He never mentioned the Bronze Star gathering dust in a drawer at his small apartment. He never spoke about the nightmares that still woke him some nights, or the friends whose names were carved in black granite in Washington, D.C. He never told anyone about the village outside Saigon where he had carried 3 wounded soldiers through enemy fire, or the helicopter crash where he had pulled the pilot from burning wreckage. He just showed up every day at 6 a.m., made the first pot of coffee, and treated every customer like they mattered, because he had learned something in the jungle that took him decades to fully understand. Real strength isn't about what you can do to others. It's about what you choose not to do. It's about serving when you could command. It's about building when you know how to destroy. The 2 Northwestern students never came back to Murphy's diner. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood, not about the fight, but about the man who had ended it without throwing a punch. Business picked up over the following weeks. Customers lingered longer, left bigger tips, treated Sarah and the other staff with more respect. And Frank continued doing what he had always done, serving others 1 cup of coffee at a time, making sure everyone who walked through those doors left feeling a little more human than when they arrived. 3 months later, George Kowalski became a regular at the Thursday night meetings at the VFW hall. He started sleeping better, talking more, smiling occasionally. He never thanked Frank directly, but he didn't need to. Some conversations happen in silence between men who have carried similar weight. Frank Martinez understood that real heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons. Sometimes they serve coffee at 6 a.m. to people who don't know their names. Sometimes they spend 40 years in the same place doing the same job because they know that consistency is a form of courage. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Frank, whose quiet strength hit an extraordinary path? Have you ever encountered a person who chose chose service over recognition, who found their purpose in the simple act of making others feel valued. Tell us their story in the comments below, because here at One Human, One Story, we believe that real heroism isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just showing up every day, choosing kindness over indifference, and serving others even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes walk among us every day. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember to look for the extraordinary in the ordinary. You never know what incredible stories the people around you might be carrying.